They looked like just 6 abandoned pups near a gas station, dusty, shaking, barely clinging to life. But the moment Colby Atwood saw the numbered collars, something in his gut turned cold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So where was number 1? And why did one of the puppies have a strange injection scar beneath its fur? What Colby found next wasn't just cruelty, it was a system. A secret buried under medical waste and corporate lies. And one woman who risked everything to stop it. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe animals are not experiments, hit subscribe. Because this story is as real as the scars they left behind. Dallas, Texas, noon. The kind of day where heat came not just from above, but from every surface it had been sitting on. Asphalt turned soft under tired tires. Metal glared so bright you could barely look at it. And the wind, when it came, carried nothing but dry grit and a warning. It was the kind of heat that made you think twice before moving. And 3 times before caring. Colby Atwood was already moving, but only because he had learned long ago to do things before his body had a chance to argue. 45 years old, tall and lean with the wiry strength of someone who fixed things that didn't want to be fixed, Colby lived in a rhythm of rust, fuel, and silence. His beard was uneven and mostly gray, eyes narrowed and pale like worn denim, and his fingers were permanently stained from grease and old oil. His only home was the back room of the gas station he ran, Outwood Fuel, half a mile off the highway, the kind of place GPS maps no longer cared to update. The station had 2 working pumps, one vending machine that still spat out lukewarm soda, and a flickering open sign that probably encouraged more pity than confidence. The front office smelled faintly of rubber and old coffee. There hadn't been a real customer in hours, and Colby didn't expect any. Especially now that the new development plans meant the land would be sold and the place flattened within the month. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was just waiting it out. Colby had lived alone for 8 years now, ever since Darlene left, taking her quiet rage and her U-Haul full of furniture to live in San Marcos. He didn't blame her. He hadn't been much of anything back then, still wasn't most days, but he liked the quiet. He liked the way the sky looked when there were no buildings to block it. And he liked dogs, though he hadn't owned one since he was 12. It was almost by accident that he noticed the movement. He had just come around the side of the building, carrying a bucket of water for the mesquite tree he stubbornly tried to keep alive behind the station, when a flicker of something pale shifted in his peripheral vision, just near the ice machine. He paused, blinked, then walked slowly toward the edge of the vending area where shadows pooled against the sun-bleached concrete. There, in a staggered line of exhaustion and confusion, were 6 golden retriever puppies. Colby stood over them, stunned, as if they might vanish if he moved too fast. They were tiny, barely a month old, maybe less. Their coats, once the soft golden of sunrise, were matted and caked with road dust. 2 were lying flat on their sides, panting lightly. One was curled against the wall, shaking. The rest clustered close together, eyes half closed from fatigue. But what truly stopped Colby cold were the collars. Each one of them wore a cracked leather collar, crudely stitched and aged with sweat and grime. Burned into the leather, with something hot and permanent, were numbers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 collars, 6 dogs. Colby knelt slowly, letting his knees creak as they always did. One of the puppies, a slightly larger one with wider paws, lifted its head and let out a soundless whimper. Another, smaller and paler, turned its face into the side of the others as if to disappear. He swallowed. "Well," he murmured, "who the hell left you?" He stood, went inside, and returned with an old storage bin and 2 dusty towels. He laid the towels down in the bin, shaded it beneath the awning, then gently, so gently, moved each puppy in. They didn't fight. They didn't resist. They were too tired to care. He brought out a shallow bowl of water and placed it beside the bin. One pup sniffed at it, then began to lap weakly. The others followed, cautious, slow. None of them barked. Colby leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking down at them as if they might begin to speak. He didn't know what to do. He only knew they couldn't stay like this. That was when he heard the voice. "They were dropped off," said a woman. He turned to see Ivy Garber, 70 years old, walking slowly across the dusty gravel path that connected her mobile home to the station. She wore a sun-faded red visor, thick round glasses, and a blue dress with small white anchors printed across the fabric. Her gray hair was pulled back into a frizzed bun, and she held a plastic grocery bag in one hand, mostly used for feeding stray cats and pigeons. "They?" Colby asked. "I saw them this morning," she said, stepping under the awning. "Was up early with my coffee. Around 5:30. A white pickup with no plates came down the side road real slow. Didn't even park proper. Just coasted to the back of the station. Someone got out, set something down, drove off. Real quiet." "You saw who?" She shook her head. "Couldn't make out the driver. Windows stayed up. But whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. Took care to do it without waking anything." Colby looked back at the bin. The puppies were beginning to fall asleep, curled into one another, tails twitching occasionally like fallen leaves. "There should be 7, he said softly. "I counted the box. Looked big enough for 7. "You're sure?" "As sure as I'm standing," she replied. 7 little shapes, 6 now." He felt it again then, that cold slip of unease down his spine. He glanced around the lot, scanned the bushes, the ditch by the road, even under the old vending machine, but he saw no sign of a 7th. Not yet. Ivy adjusted her glasses and peered into the bin. "They're in bad shape, poor little things. You gonna take them in?" "I guess I already did," he said. "They need help. Real help. Not just water and shade." Colby sighed, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. "Yeah, I know." She nodded, then handed him a small zippered pouch from her grocery bag. "Electrolyte mix. I keep it for the strays." He accepted it silently. Ivy turned to leave, her sandals crunching softly on gravel. "Colby," she said over her shoulder, "whatever this is, it wasn't random. Nobody numbers puppies for nothing." And then she was gone. Colby looked once more at the sleeping pups. Dust swirled in a sudden gust of wind, lifting the hem of the tarp, rattling a loose hinge on the soda machine. He didn't know where they'd come from. He didn't know who had left them. But he knew this much. There was no way he was letting them disappear again. Not before he found number 1. The morning after the discovery of the 6 golden puppies brought no relief from the Texas heat. It was only 9 o'clock, and already the metal awning above Outwood Fuel popped and creaked as it expanded under the sun. The wind had grown restless again, picking up dust and the occasional candy wrapper, swirling them across the parking lot like uneasy spirits. Colby Atwood hadn't slept much. He had spent the night checking on the puppies every few hours, refilling their water, shifting towels, and watching for signs of illness he wouldn't know how to treat. It had been years since he had held something this small, this fragile, and it had awoken something he thought had long dried up inside him, something that resembled purpose. He was halfway through rinsing out a crusted food bowl behind the station when he noticed a dark streak along the concrete. It was dry, thin, reddish-brown, easily dismissed as old rust or oil, but something in his gut said otherwise. He followed the trail silently. It curved behind the propane cage, ran past the old vending machines, and finally disappeared under a dented, half-forgotten delivery truck that hadn't moved in years. A piece of tarp flapped from its undercarriage like a torn flag. He crouched, grunting at the stiffness in his knees, and lifted the corner of the tarp. The body was curled tightly, as if it had tried to make itself small enough to disappear. A golden retriever puppy, tiny even compared to the 6 he'd found yesterday, lay still beneath the truck. The fur was sticky around its belly, legs stiff, mouth slightly open as if crying had once lived there. Around its neck, the collar was torn, charred at the edges, but still readable. Colby sat back on his heels. The wind picked up again, but the air felt heavier now. He reached in with trembling hands and lifted the tiny thing from the dust. Its body was cold, but not yet stiff, the muscles loose like an old rag doll. As he turned it gently, he noticed the odd bruising along its neck and a shaved patch just behind the ear. There, near the skin, was a small injection mark, red and slightly inflamed. What chilled him wasn't just the wound. It was what was tangled in the fur near the shoulder. A tiny strip of cloth, nearly invisible, knotted into the matted hair. He pulled it loose carefully and held it up. It was no larger than his thumb, off-white with faded blue printing. 3 interlocking triangles formed a logo he didn't recognize. Beneath it, in even smaller font, "For biological progress and veterinary innovation." Colby stood slowly, still holding the puppy to his chest. He didn't understand much about medicine, but he knew what words like biological and innovation usually meant. He also knew he'd just stumbled into something far beyond abandonment. He wrapped the small body in a towel and placed it in a shoebox, setting it gently on the workbench inside. He wasn't ready to bury it yet. The puppies stirred as he entered. One raised its head and let out a tiny yawn. Another tried to crawl toward him, tail dragging in a slow wag. He crouched beside them and counted again, just to be sure. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Still here, still breathing. The bell above the station door jingled. It startled him. He turned and saw a woman stepping inside, her hair catching the light like copper thread. She moved with purpose, a duffel bag over one shoulder, dark jeans, and a gray t-shirt that read Texas Wildlife Rescue. Her boots were dusty. Her eyes were green and tired in the way people get when they've seen too many endings and not enough justice. "Sorry to barge in," she said, scanning the room quickly. "Is this where the puppies are?" Colby blinked. "You're Shannon McLean," she said, extending a hand. "I run a mobile vet clinic a few blocks down. My assistant told me someone posted about 6 golden retriever pups left near a gas station. I was nearby. I figured I'd check." Colby shook her hand, noting her grip, firm but quick, like she didn't linger long anywhere. She glanced down at the box where the pups now slept in a messy pile. Her breath hitched. "Are those numbered collars?" she said. Colby nodded. 2 through 7. Her eyes darted to the shoebox on the bench. "Number 1. He hesitated, then lifted the lid. She moved slowly, reverently. When she saw the puppy, her jaw clenched. Then she spotted the injection mark. And then the cloth scrap. Colby handed it to her. She looked at the logo, then sat down hard on a nearby stool. "I've seen this before," she said, voice low. He waited. 2 years ago, in Arkansas, I was called to a shelter that received a litter of pups with similar collars. Numbers, weird health issues, signs of drug exposure. One died within 24 hours of arrival. I dug around, tracked the collars back to a company claiming to develop immune-boosting serums for livestock. They were doing covert animal trials, mostly on strays and discarded litters. Dogs that wouldn't be missed. Colby felt something shift inside him. Shannon pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the collar and cloth. They changed names after the investigation, went dark. This logo, different design, same purpose. She looked up at him. These puppies were part of something. Colby exhaled slowly. "And someone brought them here?" "To hide them, or get them out." Neither said anything for a while. Then Shannon added, "I can take them, if you want. I've got better supplies, meds, blankets." Colby shook his head. "They stay. For now. They found me. I'm not handing them over just yet." She tilted her head, studying him. "You always talk like you're in a Western?" she asked, half smiling. "No," he said. "Only when I don't trust someone yet." She smirked, then stood. "Fair enough, but I'm coming back, and you're going to need help." He didn't argue. As she walked toward the door, she stopped, hand on the handle. "Colby, right?" He nodded. "I'm not the enemy," she said. And then she was gone. Outside, the wind rose again, swirling dust across the lot like a whisper. Colby looked back at the shoebox, then at the sleeping pups. He didn't know why they'd been chosen. He didn't know what had been done to them. But he knew this. Number 1 had already paid the price. And he wasn't going to let the rest follow. The morning sun glared off the white propane tank behind the station, casting harsh shadows across the lot, like someone had drawn them with a knife. The wind had picked up again, sweeping dried mesquite leaves and gravel in spirals, rattling the edge of the old Outwood fuel sign as if nature itself had grown restless. Colby Atwood stood in the open doorway, arms crossed, watching the golden dust roll across the cracked concrete. He hadn't said much since Shannon left yesterday, only nodded at the shoebox each time he passed by, like acknowledging a grave. Inside, the 6 remaining puppies were still huddled in their makeshift shelter, a thick plastic bin lined with a comforter Colby had found in the storage closet. They were quieter now, not from peace, but from weakness. Their bodies, once curled in a tangle of hope, now sprawled unevenly. One had vomited during the night. Another refused water. The rest moved only when Colby lifted them to clean the bedding. He didn't need a vet to tell him something was wrong. But she came anyway. Shannon McLean arrived just past 9, her vet bag slung across one shoulder, sunglasses pushed into her thick auburn hair. She wore a dark green button-up shirt rolled at the sleeves, khaki work pants stained from use, and boots with worn treads. Her sharp green eyes scanned the area like a detective arriving at a crime scene. Colby gestured toward the bin, then stepped aside. She knelt immediately, unzipping her bag, pulling out latex gloves, a small light, and a tablet for notes. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this too many times to flinch. "They're warm to the touch," she murmured. "Too warm." She lifted the eyelid of the smallest one, a number 6, and let out a soft breath. Pale mucosa. Slight inflammation. Colby watched from a distance, leaning on the counter like he might break something just by being close. "See this?" she asked, turning one of the puppies gently onto its side. Small yellowing on the belly. And this one's ears? Slight tremor response when I tap them. That's a neurosymptom. "You saying they're sick?" he asked. "I'm saying they were poisoned," she replied quietly. "Not intentionally, maybe, but exposed." She picked up a tiny syringe and drew a small amount of blood from one pup, then another. Colby noticed the way her jaw tightened, not with panic, but the steady rage of someone watching a pattern return. "The last time I saw this," she said as she packed the blood samples into her cooler, "was at a facility in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. The puppies had tremors, jaundice, muscle weakness. Some went blind in one eye, all from an experimental drug that was supposed to boost their immune response, called Alpha Boost R, meant for livestock first, then pets." Colby's eyebrows furrowed. "Was it legal?" She gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "It was legal in paperwork, not in practice. The FDA had denied the application, but they kept testing anyway, off-grid, quietly. No one noticed because they use dogs like these, strays, discards, shelter throwaways, no microchips, no names." She moved to the last puppy, number 2, and paused. "This one's different." "How?" "No injection scar," she said. "None that I can find. Maybe they ran out of time. Or maybe he wasn't meant to be part of the batch." Colby stepped closer, looking down. The puppy looked back with the faintest flicker of trust. Its eyes were watery, but alert. "He's stronger," Shannon said. "Maybe he resisted the dose. Maybe he wasn't dosed at all." She stood and pulled off her gloves. Her face had hardened, but her voice remained level. "If this is Alpha Boost, they're in danger. That stuff was pulled for a reason. It caused liver damage, cognitive degeneration, blindness. Most didn't survive long." Colby rubbed his jaw, staring at the bin. "You said they shut it down?" "They said they did," she replied. "I filed a formal report. Attached photos, test results, testimonies. Then the file was sealed. No further action. A few months later, the building was empty, and the company rebranded under a new name." "What name?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." She stepped outside, lit a cigarette with a hand that trembled only slightly, and leaned against the siding of the building. Her eyes scanned the horizon like she expected someone to be watching. Colby followed her gaze, but saw nothing, only heat waves and sky. "I don't want them to die here," he said finally. "They won't," she replied, "not if we work fast." He looked down at his hands, rough and dirt-stained. "I'm not a vet." "You're more than that," she said. "You're someone who stayed when most people would have walked away." Just then, a white sedan pulled into the lot, smooth, quiet, polished. A man stepped out. He was in his 50s, tall, clean-shaven, with steel-gray hair slicked back. His suit was pressed, pale blue tie neat against a white collar. He wore black gloves despite the heat. Colby straightened. Shannon's expression darkened. The man approached slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "Good morning," he said. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Travis Connell. I'm a representative for a private research group that may have lost some property in this area." Colby didn't speak. Shannon crossed her arms. "Dogs," Travis continued. "Young ones, golden retrievers, possibly tagged with simple identification collars, numbers. Have you seen them?" Shannon took a step forward. "And if we have?" "I'd like to retrieve them," he said politely. "They're very valuable to our program." "What kind of program?" Colby asked. "Behavioral tracking," Travis said smoothly. "Nothing harmful. All regulated." Shannon narrowed her eyes. Do you have documents to prove that? Travis smiled again. I'm not here to litigate, just to collect what belongs to us. Colby felt a tightening in his chest. He glanced at the door, where the puppies lay behind a worn fan and an old screen door. They're not yours, Colby said. Travis tilted his head. They are, but I can come back with authorities if you prefer. He handed over a card. Black text on a white background. No company logo, just a name, a number, and a line of text that read, Veterinary Biological Advancement Group, Internal Affairs Division. Then he turned, adjusted his cuffs, and walked calmly back to his car. The sedan pulled away in silence. Shannon looked down at the card, then tossed it into the trash. That, she muttered, is how they operate. Gentle voice, clean suits, but what they want is always blood. Inside, one of the puppies let out a soft cry. Colby reached for the cooler. What do we do now? We fight, she said, with proof. The outskirts of Dallas held a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt buried. Colby drove the faded blue pickup he'd owned for over a decade, its engine rattling like an old man trying to clear his throat. Shannon sat beside him, arms crossed over a canvas satchel stuffed with folders and veterinary gear. Neither spoke much. The road stretched long and empty ahead, flanked by fenced-off fields and warehouses long forgotten by zoning boards. They were heading toward the last registered address tied to the logo on the cloth found in puppy number 1's fur, the interlocking triangles stamped with the name of a supposed veterinary research group. Shannon had pulled it from an archived investigative blog, one that had posted anonymously about illegal animal trials. The building wasn't listed anymore on any public database, but someone had left a digital footprint, and Shannon knew how to follow them. The place wasn't marked by a sign, only a rusted gate chained loosely, and a long gravel drive. As the truck pulled in, Colby noticed the surrounding lot had weeds too orderly to be wild, as if someone had recently trimmed them but wanted it to look abandoned. The building itself was squat and square, made of dull beige concrete, with blacked-out windows and a single metal door framed in rust. Colby cut the engine. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "No," Shannon said, stepping out, "but sometimes the door you're afraid of is the one they forget to lock." Inside, the building smelled like old plastic and ammonia. The hallway walls were once white but now stained yellow, and the overhead lights flickered weakly as they moved deeper into the structure. Shannon led the way with a small flashlight, boots echoing across linoleum floors. They passed empty offices, scattered lab chairs, a file cabinet tipped on its side, nothing alive. But the walls held ghosts, faint outlines where charts once hung, claw marks on the steel of old kennels, a broken thermometer left on a cart like someone had walked out mid-shift. They entered what had once been a main lab. The air turned colder. Computers were gone, but desks remained. Colby trailed behind her, uncertain why his heart was beating so hard. He wasn't a hero, never had been. He just fixed engines, pumped gas, and tried not to mess things up too much. But somehow, this wasn't just Shannon's fight anymore. She opened a bottom drawer in one of the lab stations and let out a breath. Inside was a red-bound logbook. Its cover was unmarked, but the pages inside told another story. She flipped through, eyes scanning fast. Then she stopped. Colby leaned over her shoulder, handwritten in block letters across the top of one page. Trial record, litter hash. 11-second injection phase. Dosage, Alpha Boost R, V2, 0. Subjects, 7. Outcome, 1 failure, 2 rejected, 3 response pending, 1 withdrawal unauthorized. Beneath that, scribbled in smaller handwriting, if anyone finds this, please, just let them be dogs. Let them be free. Shannon whispered the words aloud. Let them be dogs. Colby stared at the final line. Withdrawal unauthorized, he repeated. What does that mean? But Shannon was already flipping to the back of the logbook, where a loose page had been stuffed in, wrinkled and stained with ink that had run slightly. It was a letter, unsigned. I can't unsee what they've done. I begged them to stop. Told them number 1 wasn't stable, that the injection had gone too far. They laughed. They always laughed. But I took them, the others. I used my badge, the old van key, and drove fast. Number 1 didn't make it. He went still before I reached the station. If you find this, you were meant to. I couldn't save them all, but maybe you can. M.H. Shannon exhaled slowly. M.H. Marla Hayes. Who is she? Colby asked. She used to work for VetGen Labs, Shannon said. I saw her name on reports once. She filed a formal concern with the veterinary board and then disappeared. I thought she'd quit, but maybe she tried to fix it her own way. Colby stood in silence, watching Shannon tuck the letter carefully into her bag. She's the one who left them, he said. She brought the puppies to my station. She's the reason I found them. She risked everything, Shannon said, and it still cost her. They left the building without speaking. The wind outside had picked up again, swirling gravel across the driveway. Colby thought of the shoebox behind the counter, where number 1 had been laid to rest, of the other 6, still sleeping, still trembling, still alive. As they climbed back into the truck, Colby noticed a woman standing near the road, her figure silhouetted against the bright Texas sky. She wore a plain gray hoodie, jeans, and a sun hat that obscured her face. She was watching them. When he blinked, she was gone. Back at the station, the puppies were stirring. Shannon ran fresh fluids and took vitals. One of them, number 5, had perked up slightly, its tongue flicking weakly at the bowl of rehydration mix. Colby watched in silence, his arms crossed, his boots dusty with warehouse grit. We're not alone in this anymore, Shannon said. No, he agreed, but maybe now we know who started it. The wind had shifted directions again. It now blew in from the west, warm and unsettling, as though it carried the warning of a coming storm. Colby Atwood stood behind the counter of the Outwood fuel station, wiping down a crate of canned oil that hadn't moved in months. The radio was off. The dogs were quiet. Shannon was in the back room, administering fluids to number 3, who had begun refusing food that morning. Outside, the late afternoon light struck every dusty surface with an almost metallic intensity, as if the sun had something to prove. It was the quiet before the knock that caught Colby's attention. 3 slow raps on the aluminum frame door. Not the urgent kind. The kind that asked for attention without needing to raise its voice. Colby set down the rag and moved to the door. Through the glass, he saw a man standing perfectly still, as if posing for a portrait only he could see. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to precision, a sky blue shirt beneath, and a slim black tie that barely moved with the wind. His hair was silver, not the dull kind, but the polished chrome that made you think he'd never known chaos. He wore dark gloves. In Texas, heat. Colby opened the door but didn't step aside. Can I help you? He asked, tone flat. The man offered a practiced smile, small and symmetrical. I believe you can. My name is Travis Connell. I spoke with your colleague the other day. His voice was smooth, devoid of effort, the kind often heard in polished negotiations and courtrooms. Colby didn't respond. Travis's eyes flicked once past Colby's shoulder, as if mentally measuring the square footage. I'm here to collect 6 animals that were misplaced recently. Golden Retriever puppies. They're tagged. Should be numbered. They're not misplaced, Colby said. They were dumped. Travis tilted his head. Let's not get stuck on semantics. Footsteps sounded behind Colby as Shannon stepped forward, wiping her hands on her vest. She wore a navy scrub top, her auburn hair pulled into a loose braid, eyes tired but sharp. You were told no, she said calmly. Travis didn't turn to face her, just slightly adjusted his stance. Miss McLean, I understand you have a reputation for passion and a long memory. But this isn't personal. The animals are part of a private research initiative that was halted mid-phase due to technical irregularities. Our company is simply retrieving our property to complete legal documentation. You mean destroy evidence, Shannon said, because those irregularities nearly killed them. Colby took a half step forward, not threatening, just solid. You got a warrant? He asked. No, but I do have ownership documentation from the Veterinary Biological Advancement Group. I can bring local law enforcement if necessary. Shannon reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and snapped a photo of Travis mid-sentence. Then you won't mind if I forward your presence to the Texas State Veterinary Board and my contacts at Austin's Office for Animal Welfare. For the first time, Travis's expression shifted, only slightly, a subtle contraction of the jaw, then it passed. You're making this unnecessarily difficult, he said. No, Colby replied. You did that the second you put numbers around their necks. Travis reached into his coat pocket, slowly, and placed a slim envelope on the counter. We'll be in touch. Consider this your formal notice. Then he turned and walked away, smooth and unbothered. His car, an unmarked black sedan, was parked across the lot. As he entered, a second figure in the driver's seat turned to look at the station. Colby caught the glint of sunglasses, but not the face beneath. The sedan rolled out silently. Shannon picked up the envelope. "What's the bet this is a cease and desist?" "Or a threat dressed in legalese," Colby muttered. She opened it. Inside was a single printed page with letterhead. Clean, corporate, sterile. It referenced ongoing litigation, property rights, and the intention to retrieve biological research assets pending retrieval. It bore no signature, just initials. T.C. Travis Cannell, Shannon murmured. "I've seen that name before, on the Pine Bluff investigation. He was a senior manager for VetGen's bioengineering division, publicly cleared of wrongdoing, privately accused of falsifying permits for live trials." Colby raised a brow. "And now he wants to play repo man. Now he's cleaning up loose ends." They both turned at the sudden yelp from the back room. Shannon bolted in, Colby close behind. One of the puppies, number 3, was convulsing, foam at the mouth, breathing shallow. The other 5 had backed into a corner of the pen, their tiny bodies shaking as they watched. Shannon dropped to her knees, stabilizing the puppy with practiced hands. "Seizure," she said tightly. "Get me ice." Colby sprinted to the fridge, grabbed a Ziploc from the freezer, and handed it to her. She wrapped the cold against the pup's neck, murmuring words he couldn't hear. "Come on, sweetheart. Come on, little one." It took nearly 3 minutes before the tremors stopped. The puppy lay limp, breathing shallow, heart fragile as a whisper. Shannon sat back on her heels, sweat glistening on her brow. "That wasn't just residual reaction," she said quietly. "That was triggered, like something changed." Colby's eyes narrowed. "You think it's connected to Travis?" Shannon nodded. "Someone knew we were close. They accelerated the timeline." "You think they poisoned him?" "Or sent someone in," she said. To finish what Marla stopped. Colby looked at the door. Someone had been here. The sky over Dallas had turned dark and restless by nightfall. The wind, which had danced dry and playful during the day, now grew aggressive, sweeping sand and loose trash into whirling eddies against the sides of the old gas station. Power lines hummed, and the security light above Pump 2 flickered, as if trying to decide whether to stay on or give up. Colby Atwood sat in the back room, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor, but not really seeing it. The 6 puppies slept just feet away, curled like comma-shaped whispers on the blanket-covered mattress he had repurposed into a communal bed. Number 3, the one who had seized earlier that day, lay closest to the makeshift fan, breathing softly but unevenly. Every now and then, Colby's hand would reach over instinctively and rest gently on the pup's side, checking for life. He didn't like what he was becoming, this anxious man who checked breathing and counted heads more often than he ate. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like something in his life actually mattered. Shannon had gone home to grab supplies. She said she'd be back before midnight, bringing with her a bag of vaccines, fresh saline, and a thermal scanner. She'd also mentioned something about motion sensor cameras. Colby had nodded, but truth be told, he hadn't heard half of it. His mind had gotten stuck on Travis Connell's gloves. Too clean. Too planned. Like a man who never intended to touch what he broke. A sharp metallic clink jolted him upright. He listened. Another sound, barely audible, like metal brushing against metal. He moved quietly to the main room, where the shadows were thick and the old icebox hummed like a warning. The wind outside had risen to a low howl, shaking the windows. He reached beneath the counter, where he kept a heavy flashlight and a rusted socket wrench, useless as a weapon, but comforting to hold. The sound came again. This time, from the direction of the back storage shed, where the puppies had first been housed. He moved fast. The rear door was slightly ajar, its lock swinging limply on one hinge. Someone had broken in. Colby pushed it open with his shoulder. Inside, shadows stretched long beneath the swinging single bulb overhead. Storage crates, rags, a broken vending machine. Everything seemed untouched, except the back cage. The latch was bent. The door hung open. Colby stepped inside just as a piercing beep, beep, beep erupted from the side of the building. Shannon's emergency motion alarm, wired to a portable sensor she had set up earlier, just in case. He ran outside, boots slamming the pavement. A white SUV was peeling away from behind the station, kicking up clouds of dirt and debris. The driver wore a ball cap low over his face. The back seat window was partially open. For a terrible moment, Colby thought one of the puppies was gone. He sprinted inside. All 6 were there, breathing, shaking, but present. Colby slid to the floor and exhaled sharply. They hadn't come to steal. Not yet. They had come to scout. By the time Shannon returned 30 minutes later, Colby was outside, hammering nails into old wood planks to brace the door shut. She climbed out of her car, a battered green Subaru coated in vet clinic bumper stickers and a layer of dust. "What happened?" she asked, her voice already tense. He explained. The sounds, the SUV, the broken latch, the near miss. Shannon's face hardened. "It's time to move them." "To where?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "My father's horse ranch," she said. 50 minutes northwest, off the grid. He passed away 3 years ago, but the barn's intact, fenced, remote. We can set up temporary quarters." "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "I was trying to believe we could fight from here," she said quietly. "But now they know we're standing in the open." They worked together in silence, gathering the supplies. Blankets, bottles, medications, the shoebox still resting in the corner with the body of puppy number 1, which Colby insisted on bringing too. Shannon didn't object. As they loaded the final bin, Colby paused, leaning against the back of the pickup, lit only by the station's flickering floodlight. "Back in '09, he said, voice low, "I worked part-time for a lab out in Amarillo. They said they were running behavioral studies on shelter dogs, paid $50 for each pickup. All I had to do was bring them the dogs from the kill list. I never asked questions." Shannon turned slowly, watching him. 3 months in, I found a sheet tucked into the glove box of one of the transport vans. It listed each dog I'd delivered. Name, age, weight. Then, a column labeled injection schedule. He looked down. "I left that day, never picked up the check. Haven't touched a leash since." Shannon didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet but not unkind. "You're here now." Colby nodded. "Yeah, but back then, I was part of this, even if I didn't know it." Shannon walked over and placed a hand on his arm, not to comfort, but to steady. "Then help me finish what Marla started." They drove into the night, 6 puppies asleep in the back seat, the shoebox tucked beneath Shannon's feet. Behind them, the wind scattered dust across the now empty station, like the aftermath of a battle barely begun. The ranch was barely visible from the main road, hidden behind a swaying curtain of prairie grass and a crooked fence line that hadn't seen paint in years. It sat on the far edge of Denton County, surrounded by fields of wildflowers gone dry from sun and neglect. Once, this land had echoed with the snorts and hooves of horses. Now, the only sound that drifted from the barn was the steady hum of wind pushing through broken slats in the roof. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the smell of hay, dust, and faint memories of animals long gone. Shannon moved quickly, turning the space into something halfway between a stable and a veterinary field unit. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and her hair was tied back in a low knot that had come undone hours ago. Sweat clung to her temples, but her hands never trembled. Colby had just finished dragging the last of the feed sacks into a corner, arranging them like a makeshift barrier. He wore a flannel shirt streaked with dirt and his old jeans patched twice at the knees. He looked tired but alert, like a man who'd been thrust back into a world he once ran from. The 6 puppies now rested on folded wool blankets in a wooden enclosure Shannon had built from 2 unused stall gates. Each had a shallow dish of water and a small mound of soaked kibble softened with goat's milk. Most of them were sleeping. But number 6 wasn't. He had stopped responding hours earlier. His breathing was shallow, his body curled tight as if trying to disappear. His cream-colored fur, once soft and matted with sweat, now stuck flat to his side. His gums had turned a pale bluish gray, and he hadn't lifted his head since the truck ride. Shannon knelt beside him, gently sliding a thermometer under his hind leg. 105, she whispered. Too high. She motioned to Colby without looking up. Get the ice packs from the cooler, and the eucalyptus oil. Colby moved quickly, returning with a Ziploc of crushed ice and a tiny vial. Shannon placed the pack under the pup's belly, massaging his legs in slow, circular motions. He's disoriented, she said. You see his eyes? She lifted one tiny lid. No focus. That's neuroinflammation. From the injection? Colby asked. From whatever they put in him, she said. This isn't listed in any veterinary database. It's not something approved or even rejected. This is underground. Colby lowered himself onto an overturned feed bucket. You're saying it doesn't officially exist. I'm saying it wasn't supposed to be seen. For the next hour, Shannon worked with silent intensity, wiping the puppy's gums with wet gauze, rotating cold cloths, whispering things Colby couldn't hear. At one point, she closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to the edge of the stall, muttering under her breath. Colby stepped back, letting her work. Then came the alert. Shannon's phone buzzed twice and displayed an email address neither of them recognized. sunset31@protonmail.com. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I know them." Shannon tapped it open. "I'm sorry I'm doing this way. I'm not brave like you. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep seeing their eyes, especially number 1. I never meant to take them out that late. I thought I had more time. I didn't think it would hit him so fast. They told us it was for vaccine testing. Said it would help reduce canine cancers, boost immunity, save lives. But then the notes changed, the dosage changed. I saw one of the test leads burn the chart so no one could trace it. They planned to dispose of the entire litter, so I ran. If you're reading this, they're probably still looking. I'm not sure I'll make it to speak up, but maybe they can. Maybe those little ones can be the proof. Just don't let them vanish." Shannon stared at the screen for a long moment, her eyes welling but not blinking. "She found us," she murmured. Colby leaned over to read. "Marla Hayes," Shannon nodded. "She's still hiding, but she's watching." They printed the message, stored it in a waterproof folder, and slid it inside the red trial journal from the abandoned lab. Piece by piece, the truth was starting to breathe. But inside the stall, number 6 had stopped doing so. Shannon reached for him again. His ribs rose shallowly. His tongue lolled slightly from the side of his mouth. His legs were twitching, small, involuntary spasms like faulty electrical pulses. "I don't know how much longer he has," she said. "We need to start a drip, but we don't have an IV stand." "I'll hold him," Colby said. "You prep the line." And he did. He knelt beside Shannon and cupped the puppy in both hands like a fragile instrument. The fur was warm. Too warm. He could feel the rapid flutter of the heartbeat against his fingers, like a bird trying to outrun a storm. As Shannon inserted the needle and secured the line, Colby watched the pup's chest, willing it to rise just once more. It did. Then again. Slightly steadier. Shannon placed a cool cloth across the pup's head and leaned back, resting her head against the stall. "Keep him elevated. Don't let him turn onto his side," she instructed. They stayed like that for nearly 2 hours. Shannon mixing fluids, Colby holding number 6 with unyielding patience, whispering words he didn't know he still remembered how to say. At dawn, the sun broke across the field in streaks of orange and gold, and a single weak yip came from the stall. Number 6 raised his head, eyes dazed but open. He was still here. It began with the sound of gravel shifting under unfamiliar tires. The ranch had gone quiet after the long night. Number 6 was sleeping, his breathing soft and even for the first time in 2 days. The other puppies were huddled beside him, blanketed in the warmth of hay and threadbare quilts. Shannon had finally closed her eyes on the barn's loft platform, stretched out on a sleeping mat with her arms curled around her clinic bag. Colby sat in a folding chair by the barn door, the weight of dawn on his shoulders and an old hunting flashlight resting across his lap like a relic from another life. Then he heard it. Not the wind, not a coyote call. A vehicle, moving slow, trying not to be heard. Colby rose without a word, his hand reaching for the switch taped beside the door, connected to the makeshift alarm Shannon had set up earlier using a salvaged motion detector and a second-hand security siren. He didn't hit it yet. Instead, he stepped into the shadows near the feed bins, letting his body disappear into darkness. A minute passed, then another, then the door opened. There were 3 of them, silhouetted against the dim blue-gray of pre-dawn. 2 men, one shorter and heavy-set with a thick neck and camo jacket, the other tall and lean with a baseball cap pulled low. Between them, a woman, small, angular, her blonde hair pulled tight beneath a beanie. All wore gloves. The woman held a small black case. The taller man carried a crowbar. None of them spoke. They moved with precision, heading straight for the stall that held the puppies. Colby didn't think. He flipped the switch. The barn exploded with noise, an electronic wail that split the silence like a fire alarm going off in the middle of confession. The intruders jolted, turned, and the shorter man cursed under his breath. Shannon shot upright from the loft, grabbing her flashlight and phone. Colby stepped forward, wrench raised. "I don't know who sent you," he said loudly, "but you'd better run now." The tall man stepped forward as if weighing the distance between them. Then something behind him beeped. A blinking red light mounted above the barn door. Shannon's second sensor. They'd been caught twice. The woman shouted, "Abort!" The group turned. They were out the door in seconds, feet pounding across dirt, tossing hay and old sawdust behind them. By the time Colby and Shannon reached the front of the barn, a black SUV was already peeling away down the gravel path, tires screeching in retreat. Silence returned, broken only by the distant fading of wheels and the slow die-down of the alarm. Shannon tapped her phone with shaky hands and called the sheriff's office. "They came straight for the stall," she said. "They knew exactly what they were looking for." 15 minutes later, Deputy Lisa Herrera pulled up in a tan Ford Explorer, her badge gleaming beneath the soft morning sun. Herrera was in her early 40s, stocky, with short black hair, and an unamused expression. She had the gait of someone used to being ignored in male-dominated rooms, and the voice of someone who didn't care. She walked the perimeter with Colby while Shannon calmed the puppies. Number 6 had begun whimpering from the noise, and she gently rocked him in a towel-lined crate. "They break anything?" Herrera asked. "Not much," Colby said. "They were careful, fast, but I don't think this was their first visit." Herrera raised a brow. "You think they've been here before?" He nodded toward the barn wall, where Shannon had found scuff marks last week, too small for cattle, too clean for natural wear. They knew the layout, moved like they'd mapped it. In the stall where the puppies had been kept, Shannon found what the intruders had dropped. 3 items: a capped syringe, half filled with a viscous amber liquid; a small cryo container, still cold to the touch, labeled ABR, Batch 12; and a laminated sheet folded in half, part of a binder, torn from a trial dossier. Shannon knelt slowly, examining the paper under flashlight. It was a trial index, litter profiles, testing phase 3. Project Alpha Boost R, disposition, litter terminated, rejected, archived. Each row listed identifiers, tag 1 through tag 7. All marked removed. No names, no pictures, no final outcomes listed. "This is the list," she whispered. "These are our pups." Herrera took photos, then placed the items in evidence bags. "We'll need to run this through the state office," she said, "and I'll file it with the district attorney. But I have to warn you, this smells like federal turf. They may push us off it." Colby looked at the barn, the puppies, the tire marks. "Let them try." That night, as they finished boarding up the rear windows and reinforcing the stall door, Shannon paused and turned to Colby. "You ever wonder if Marla's still watching us?" she asked. Colby nodded. "I hope she is." They went back inside. Outside, under the cover of trees, a trail camera blinked silently in the dark, catching the last flicker of brake lights disappearing from the ridge. And someone, somewhere, realized they had failed. The sun came up slower than usual that morning, as if it too needed time to process everything that had happened. The golden haze settled gently across the open fields surrounding the barn, warming the dew off tall grass and painting the wooden walls in soft amber tones. Inside, the 6 puppies stirred beneath their blankets, their small bodies nestled together like petals from the same broken bloom. Colby Atwood stood at the old wooden workbench just outside the stall, his calloused fingers carefully guiding needle and thread through worn canvas. The barn was quiet, save for the soft chirp of birds and the occasional snort from the rusted wind vane above. The bench was littered with scraps of cloth, old shoelaces, a set of leather punch tools, and a steaming mug of black coffee that had gone untouched. He was making collars, not the rough, numbered leather ones they'd arrived with, no. These were soft, hand-stitched fabric bands reinforced with twine and lined with leftover flannel. Shannon had found in a storage box marked Dad's Stuff. They weren't pretty, but they were honest, and each one carried a name. Colby didn't rush the process. He gave himself time. The first was for the quietest of the litter, the pup that rarely barked, who always tucked herself behind the others during checkups and curled into Shannon's sleeve when thunder rolled. He threaded a soft green band, then stitched the name Mercy. The second belonged to the one who had comforted number 6 during his seizure, lying across him like a tiny shield. Colby chose a dark blue band and wrote in slow block letters, Haven. The third, the most alert and already slightly protective, had a subtle scar near her left ear. She was the first to stand at new sounds, to sniff visitors with bold curiosity. Scout. Then came the pup with the reddish streaks in his golden fur, the one always first to the food dish, last to leave the warmth, tail wagging even in fever. His name was Blaze. The fifth was Willow, the smallest, still struggling to walk in a straight line, her eyes soft and slow, but steady. She was the one Shannon held closest when nerves rattled her hands. Willow. Colby stitched in purple. And finally, there was the first to open her eyes the night of the ambush, the one who had yelped when the siren blared, but then stood, just barely, on shaky legs as if to say, I'm still here. He wrapped her in a sun-colored band and named her Dawn. By the time Shannon returned from town, Colby had already fastened each collar and was brushing straw from the puppy's coats. She found him on the floor of the stall, cross-legged, a piece of twine hanging from his mouth, and 5 puppies asleep around him like a sunburst. You named them, she said, her voice quiet, awestruck. He looked up, lips twitching into something between a smirk and a memory. Figured they'd earned it. She walked over, crouched, and gently touched the collar on Haven's neck. They're beautiful, she said. Colby shrugged. They're not perfect, but neither am I. Shannon smiled, then reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a manila folder. Speaking of things not perfect, she opened the folder and handed him a sheet. It was a confirmation notice, digital stamp, state seal, and an official case ID. Reclaim 7, application approved. Center for Recovery of Post-Testing Animals. Temporary sanctuary classification granted, pending inspection. Colby read the words twice. You're serious? He asked. I filed it last week, she said. Didn't think they'd move this fast. Guess someone upstairs finally read the file I sent, along with a few dozen photos and a signed statement from Deputy Herrera. He looked at the approval form again. So, what now? We keep doing what we're doing, she said, but now we're legit. No more hiding. No more waiting for black sedans to show up at midnight. We have protection, state backing. If they try to take the dogs again, they'll be breaking state and federal law. Colby handed the paper back and looked at the puppies. Doesn't mean they won't try. No, Shannon agreed, but it means this time we're not alone. They spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the barn walls and repurposing the tack room into a small exam station. Shannon installed a shelf for medications and filed each puppy's health record by name, not number. She labeled the vials of donated antibiotics and vitamins, arranging them in a salvaged fishing tackle box like sacred tools. While she worked, Colby stepped outside to clear the tall grass near the back fence. It was there, raking along the southern edge of the field, that he found something odd. Pressed into the soil, half buried under a mound of dry clover, was a patch of rubber tread. SUV tire, fresh. Not from the night of the break-in, but recent. Too recent. He called Shannon over. They stood in silence, looking down at the print. Someone's still watching, she said. Let them, Colby replied. We've got names now. That night, as the sky turned indigo and the field glowed with the soft green pulse of early fireflies, Shannon brought out her portable Bluetooth speaker. She played an old folk playlist. Lucinda Williams, a little James Taylor. Nothing loud, just melody, just warmth. Colby sat on the barn step, legs stretched out, a pup sleeping in each arm. Mercy and Blaze. Haven rested her head on his boot. Shannon leaned against the post, the light of her phone casting soft shadows on her face. In the quiet between songs, the puppies stirred. One of them, Scout, let out a high, warbling yip that almost resembled a note. Then Dawn followed, tail wagging. They weren't barking. They were trying to sing. And for the first time since it all began, Colby laughed. Not bitter, not guarded, just honest. They're starting to come alive, he said. No, Shannon replied gently. They're finally being who they were meant to be. The Texas afternoon unfurled like a victory flag, warm and golden, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of cedar across the hills. It had been 3 days since the press conference in Austin, and still Shannon couldn't quite believe what she'd witnessed on that courthouse lawn. Cameras flashing, reporters scrambling for statements, and most surreal of all, officials speaking aloud the names of people she thought would never face consequences. Dr. Kenneth Ballantyne, former head of operations at the Veterinary Biological Advancement Group, was being indicted on 6 federal counts of unauthorized biological testing and intentional destruction of medical records. Travis Connell, once an untouchable executive, was now being investigated for conspiracy to obstruct justice and tampering with veterinary licenses. And most importantly, the compound on the outskirts of Dallas, where Litter 11 had once lived in silence and cold concrete, had been seized by the state. The world now knew about Alpha Boost R. The world now knew about Marla Hayes. The story had broken wide 2 mornings ago, first through a local news affiliate and then nationally after an anonymous leak, believed to be from a whistleblower inside the DA's office, published photos, records, and a digital copy of Marla's letter. The headline read, "From Numbers to Names, Inside the Illegal Trials on Man's Best Friend." Shannon and Colby didn't watch it live. They were too busy rebuilding the east fence line of the ranch, where Blaze had managed to sneak out 2 nights in a row in pursuit of a rabbit he never caught. Mercy now stayed glued to Shannon's hip, her trust rebuilt day by day with gentle words and peanut butter. Scout had grown into her name, always the first to alert, the first to bark at something unfamiliar. Dawn had taken to dragging Willow's blanket around the barn, despite being the smallest, and Haven was sleeping beside Colby's work boots, snoring lightly through the dust. That afternoon, a white sedan pulled into the newly graveled driveway of Reclaim 7. Unlike Travis's pristine black model, this one bore no air of menace. The driver was a tall, lean man in his early 60s with a leather briefcase and a wide-brimmed hat. He introduced himself as Walter Beecham, state-certified shelter assessor and part-time consultant for nonprofit animal rehabilitation programs. Walter had the posture of a military man, but the voice of a lifelong counselor. His gray mustache curled up at the corners like it couldn't help but smile. He walked through the barn with Shannon and Colby at his side, nodding at the renovations, the water filtration system they'd installed, the rotating fans, the insulated pen walls, and the homemade collars on every pup. He paused longest in front of a corkboard where Shannon had pinned the scanned pages of Marla's letter beside a hand-painted sign. They were never test subjects. They were stories that hadn't been told yet. He said nothing for a while, then he nodded once, deeply. "Miss McLean," he said, flipping through his clipboard, "Reclaim 7 has passed every checkpoint. You're now registered as an official Class C sanctuary under Texas State Code. You're eligible for foster to adoption placements, state funding, and further federal grant applications. Most importantly, no one, not even a corporation with 5 lawyers and a fake smile, can touch what's in that stall." Shannon blinked. "It's real now?" "It's more than real," he replied. "It's protected." Colby exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting at last into something near relief. As Walter drove away, Shannon turned to him. "Do you still want to go back to the station?" Colby paused, then gave a lopsided grin. "Funny you ask." 3 weeks later, on a sunny afternoon so clear it felt staged, Colby Atwood stood outside what was once Outwood Fuel, now transformed by a small team of volunteers and a modest city grant. The pumps were gone. The concrete had been repaired and painted. The old open sign had been replaced by a carved wooden plank hung from a black iron bracket. From Numbers to Names, Dallas Recovery Outpost. Inside, there were kennels, not cages, with warm lighting and fleece beds. A shelf stocked with vet supplies lined the wall beside a mural painted by local school kids. A swirl of golden dogs running through a field, their collars flying in the wind like streamers. Shannon stood beside him, clipboard in hand, explaining the intake process to a group of visitors. Mercy and Scout rested on either side of the front door, watching people come and go with curious but calm eyes. "Can I help you?" Colby asked a woman stepping onto the porch. She was in her late 50s, dark blonde hair tucked into a braid, holding the hand of her elderly father, who leaned on a walker. "We heard about the puppies on the news," she said. "My dad, he lost his dog last year. Thought maybe we could meet some of them." Colby looked down at Haven, who had walked over and was now sitting patiently at the man's feet, tail sweeping the wood floor. "I think she's already met you," Colby said, smiling. As the sun lowered, casting long amber streaks across the lot, Shannon handed Colby a glass of cold sweet tea and leaned against the railing beside him. "You ever think we'd make it here?" she asked. "I didn't even think I'd make it past the first collar," he said. They watched as Blaze ran a figure eight around the back lawn, Dawn hot on his heels, tripping over her own paws. Colby turned to Shannon. "Think Marla would have liked this?" Shannon nodded. "I think she needed this as much as we did." And as the day turned into evening and the sky lit up with a soft wash of stars, the story that began with a frozen parking lot and 6 numbered collars finally closed on a porch with music, laughter, and dogs who now had names. Sometimes miracles don't come in grand flashes of light or the parting of seas. Sometimes they arrive as whimpers in the dark, a cardboard box at a gas station, a scarred puppy with trembling legs, a man who thought his life had nothing left to give. But through broken things, God often does his deepest work. He takes the discarded and gives them names. He takes the frightened and gives them peace. Colby didn't set out to become a hero. Shannon didn't plan to start a sanctuary. Yet, when love met suffering and didn't look away, something holy happened. In a world that often numbers us, may we never forget the power of a name, of mercy, of second chances. If this story touched your heart, we ask you to share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no one is forgotten in the eyes of God. Leave a comment, tell us what you believe. And if you believe in miracles, even quiet ones, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and remind you, even in the smallest acts of kindness, heaven still speaks. Comment Amen if you believe second chances are part of God's plan.